everyone, this is Pico Entertainment. We are back again, and here now we have another video, and we're going to talk about boxing and a very surprising announcement that legendary welterweight champion Manny Pacquiao will be facing current WBC and IBF welterweight champion Errol Spence. Their proposed fight will take place on August 21st, 2021 in Las Vegas, Nevada. Now, this announcement came out of the blue, really, since the last time Manny fought was back in July 2019, beating Keith Thurman for the vacant Super WBA welterweight title. Now, many were alluding to Pacquiao perhaps facing Mikey Garcia. There were others pointing to eventual encounter with WBO welterweight champion Terence Crawford many years ago, particularly when both fighters were under the top rank promotional banner. Now, Errol Spence wasn't the ideal opponent that came to mind because simply of his size. You know, Errol Spence, as we all know, is very big for a welterweight. He's much more taller than Manny. He's got the reach on Manny as well as a far more powerful opponent. And many people eventually feel that Spence will go up to the super welterweight division at 154 pounds. So he wasn't really the ideal opponent for Manny, particularly when you're talking about someone who's now 42 years old and has been out for the ring for 2 years, and many will presume that his next fight will be his last. And I think overall that's what makes this announcement so special and so enticing for many boxing fans. You know, for me and for many boxing fans, Manny for so long was the pay-per-view superstar of boxing. He was the biggest global superstar of the sport, and it would have been very easy for him to take a light-hearted opponent, a weaker opponent, or go on a typical exhibition bout or a circus act style WWE style fight encounter like certain other fighters have been doing most recently. But the fact that he's taken on Spence, a welterweight generally in his prime at 31 years old, probably now the top name within the welterweight division, it just projects that idea that has been bygone for the sport for so many years now of fighters taking on other fighters in their prime despite not having anything to prove. You know, always challenging the best, taking on the most elite fighters of their generation or past their generation in terms of this example. And that's a bygone ethos that has been disappeared for the sport for so many years now, sadly, I would say, and it really does deter the overall perception of boxing, particularly when we've had so many fans comparing over to the likes of UFC. But Manny doesn't have anything to prove. He's already a guaranteed Hall of Famer. He is, for me, my most favourite fighter, certainly over the last 10 to 15 years. His legacy is already certified and cemented, regardless of the result of this fight, and all the major kudos goes towards him for actually taking on Errol Spence. You know, we look at Errol Spence's perspective from this fight, and as stated previously, he is the top welterweight within the division. You know, he came back on a recent win against Danny Garcia after his horrific car crash back in October 2019, and to be honest, he's probably got mixed outcomes in terms of fighting Pacquiao. On the one hand, beating Pacquiao already bolsters his very accomplished resume in terms of names. You know, we look at overall his career, he's beaten the likes of Kell Brook to get the IBF, Sean Porter as well, and Danny Garcia as well. So this would technically give him 3 of the 4 belts, even though Manny was recently stripped of his WBA title due to inactivity. But if Errol Spence does meet Manny, it will without question make him the premier welterweight within the division. Many people view that already, but the only dilemma here for Spence is that he won't quite get the same credit for beating Manny, given that he's 42 years old and he hasn't been fighting for overall 2 years now. So any victory, many will just criticise him because he beat an aging or a fading version of Pacquiao. And for many, it won't convince that he can beat Terence Crawford, which, let's face it, a fight between Errol Spence and Terence Crawford is the true super fight of the division. Everybody wants to see that, you know, hopefully one day in a scenario that would be for the undisputed welterweight of the division. And of course, that generally means that when you have a fight that all fans want to see, because of boxing the way it is, that probably means that we'll never get to see. And we have to understand now that Errol Spence is 31 years old and Terence Crawford, I believe, now is 33 going on to 34. So we really don't have a lot of time left if we want to see a prime match between the two fighters overall. But the problem you also have is that if Spence does go on to beat Pacquiao, I think it makes the Crawford fight near impossible because Errol will have all of the upper hand in terms of the negotiation. He will probably offer a very minimum split that Crawford won't be able to accept, because Crawford probably still feels that he deserves 50-50. He, of course, is unbeaten, just like Errol Spence was, and he did, of course, unify the 140-pound division. But the problem you have is that Spence is the bigger commercial name. You know, he's had consistent pay-per-view fights, and when you go overall in their resume, particularly at the 147 division, then Spence has all of the big names and the most distinctive fights, and Terence Crawford doesn't. So there's no way, if Spence goes on to beat Pacquiao, which will elevate his status to an extent, there's no way he's going to be offering any kind of 50-50 split that Crawford feel he deserves. So that's the only caveat I feel that this will come from the outcome of any Spence victory over Pacquiao. So overall, I think when we look at this, it's much more of a great occasion rather than an actual great fight. You know, sadly, I do believe that Spence will win convincingly, perhaps even stopping Manny, which will be very bad to see overall. You know, he's my favourite fighter, Manny Pacquiao. I do want him to win, and if he does somehow manage to pull off a miracle victory, it automatically puts him in the greatest of all time category without question. Nobody, even his most ardent haters, could take that away from him. You know, you only look at the 3 general phases throughout his career when he first of all started fighting the likes of Morales and Barrera, of course, and Marquez early part of his career, and then later on when he rose to prominence, becoming the true commercial superstar of the sport, and then coming back lately when he's scoring wins over the likes of Furman and Vargas as well in his really autumn phase of his career. So there's no doubt about it, any victory for Pacquiao really puts him up there amongst the true elite and legendary fighters of the sport, and maybe even puts him as the greatest fighter of all time, no doubt about it overall. But I just think Spence will beat him. All I would like to see, if I've got my realistic perspective on this, I'd like to see Manny go to distance. I think if Manny can go to distance against a prime welterweight, someone who's bigger than him, taller than him, has the bigger reach, and if he can still withstand most of the pressure and go the full distance, I think that'll be a great way to kind of sign off on what has been without question one of the most magnificent careers in modern era boxing overall. So I just think all the kudos, all the credit goes for Manny for taking his fight. Again, he didn't have to. He could have gone on some other silly exhibitions, as I mentioned before, but the fact he wants to go out against one of the prime welterweights, I think deserves all the credit in the world overall. And for me, like I said, Manny Pacquiao has been the most amazing fighter for the last 10 to 15 years, and I think this is a great fight overall, and I think a great opportunity for Spence to cement or enhance his legacy to an extent as well. But I just think major kudos for Manny Pacquiao overall, and we will wait and see what happens, and I'll probably do a much more in-depth fight prediction when we get closer to this fight overall. But those are my thoughts and feelings on the recent announcements of Manny Pacquiao facing Errol Spence on August 2021. Let me know what you think in the comments below. How do you think any potential Pacquiao victory cements his legacy and puts him in the upper echelon of revered fighters over the years? Do you really think a victory against an aging Pacquiao will elevate Spence's status, and do you think it will draw us any closer or any further against the super fight against Terence Crawford that all fans in boxing want to see overall? So let me know what you think in the comments. If there are any further announcements regarding this or any other big boxing fights or incidents, then I'll try to cover them as well as I can throughout this channel. Please also hit those like and subscription and notification buttons so I can provide you with more high quality content like this in the future. But that's it for now. Take care of yourselves, stay at safe distances, and I will see you very, very soon.